Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont, and this is my review of Dragon's Dogma 2, something I waited 12 years for. Disclaimer, I received a copy of Dragon's Dogma 2 from Capcom. Didn't receive any monetary compensation. So let's get to it, shall we? And I'll try and keep this video succinct, but if you would be interested in a much longer, unscripted review of Dragon's Dogma 2, that's up on the channel too, or will be tomorrow. So stay tuned. Or not, as they say. Anyway, Dragon's Dogma 2. What an event. Frankly, a very interesting title to review. Unfortunately, not everything I hoped it would be. I'll break it down into the bad, the good, and the rest. Let's start with the good, shall we? I'll preface all of this by saying I've put 100 hours into the game, and I do like it a lot. But because Dragon's Dogma is a franchise so near and dear to my heart, I will be criticizing it a lot too. Doesn't mean I hate the game by any means. So what is good about Dragon's Dogma 2? The combat, first off. The combat is brilliant. The first game's combat was great, and the sequel has refined and expanded upon it in most areas. There are 9 distinct vocations in Dragon's Dogma 2, and every class now feels suitably unique. No more shared weapons and weapon skills. Whilst there are technically less vocations than the first game, they've been upgraded. You don't have 3 or 4 classes all sharing daggers. Now only the thief has daggers, only the archer uses a longbow, so on and so forth. While some vocations fare a little better than others, I've genuinely enjoyed playing all of them. But the biggest change to combat, the biggest upgrade, the physics. The combat is now physically based action RPG combat is the best way I can think to describe it. You can push and pull enemies, you can knock them into ledges, you can pick up items in the environment and throw them. It makes the combat feel extremely grounded in the world, as opposed to, say, Dark Souls, where all combat takes place in flat arenas and environments are largely inconsequential. This all helps Dragon's Dogma stand out as unique amongst the many games we are floating around. There was nothing quite like the first game, and there's nothing quite like the second. Related to this would be the animations. The blend between physics and animations in Dragon's Dogma 2 is fantastic. I don't know the technical terms, but the way animations blend together is superb. It's not just for fighting, but climbing, running, just about everything looks and feels right in the game. There is a nigh perfect blend between realistic momentum, weight to movements, but still feeling responsive with tight controls that feel natural, that feel satisfying, and do what you want them to do. The design of the world, the presentation is also great. The way armor and weapons look, the design of monsters. Whilst Dragon's Dogma 2's world is, for example, a lot less diverse and fantastic than, say, Elden Ring, it's still exciting to explore with a cohesive design, very appealing visual style. The monsters in particular are a standout for me. As I've said time and time again, Dragon's Dogma has an understated, classical approach to monsters: Chimera, Griffin, Harpies, Sphinx, Medusa, and so on. Now let's touch on the bad. First up, the one most commonly mentioned, but not one that really bothered me, the microtransactions. Whilst I don't like to see them, and I certainly wouldn't mind if they were removed, I think some of the reaction to these have been overblown. All of the microtransactions, save like 1 or 2 things from the deluxe edition, like soundtrack and stuff, are earnable in-game. You don't need to buy them. In fact, it would be kinda stupid to buy them, seeing as they are free in the game and not really hard to get. Still, I understand it's not appealing to buy a $70 game, open up, the store page for it, and see a huge list of little DLCs. I do find it interesting that Dragon's Dogma 2 is the one that's really annoyed people with this, because I'm pretty sure Devil May Cry had it. I think Resident Evil 4 remake had it. But maybe those weren't at launch, so maybe that's different, I don't know. But either way, you can safely ignore them and you're not missing out on anything in the game, because you can get it all in the game. Next up we have a problem that's affecting everyone: the performance. Dragon's Dogma 2's cities in particular are weird. The CPU utilization of the game is all over the place from what I understand, and it's very hard to maintain a good frame rate in a city. Even with Nvidia's frame generation enabled via a mod and capping it to 60, it'll judder now and then. I'm hoping this will be improved soon. As of the time I'm recording this, Dragon's Dogma's been out, a week and a half, and there's been no patches to improve performance. There are various other related problems too. For example, there's an extremely bizarre glitch I've been getting since the first patch the game had, where if I enter a rift stone, grab some pawns and then leave, the game will continue to run at 60 FPS, but my character's animations will be at 30 FPS. That's the only way I can think to describe it. Like, the game is smooth, but my character is like really juddery. Sometimes it will fix itself after a while, like if I rest or try and get the game to load, but sometimes it won't. Most of the time I had to just close and restart the entire game. And in the last 10 hours or so of my playthrough, and I don't understand why this happened because there wasn't like another patch, the game would just freeze for like 5 seconds now and then, and I don't know why. I could trigger it more frequently if I would Alt-Tab out of the game, but sometimes I would just be playing the game, not Alt-Tab, not doing anything, and the game would just freeze up for like 5 seconds. I think I had one crash during those 100 hours, which isn't awful, I suppose, and I didn't experience too many bugs though. Outside of the weird, animation, 30 FPS and the freezing, I don't think I experienced any, gameplay bugs that I can think of. The only maybe one I had was Dragon's Plague triggering without any apparent warning, which irked me. But I think what happened there is I was spam dozing on a bench, and I think between that last doze and me immediately going to an inn, my pawn got Dragon's Plague in those like 5 seconds, so I didn't notice it. But who knows. The story is my next complaint. I'll not go into spoilers here, but I did talk about this quite extensively in my 2-hour rambling podcast? I don't know what you'd even call that, but you'll see more of it there. But the game's ending is abrupt. Let me try and put it one way. You spend 12 of the game's base 16 missions focused on one task, which then immediately is forgotten about once you reach what should be the second act, and the game just sort of ends. Feels like a sizable chunk of the plot and the story is just missing or cut out. The game would benefit from another 5 or 6 main missions fleshing out the story, which kind of becomes incomprehensible in the last few hours. It's not a case of, grey versus black and white, but rather characters and their motivations are incomprehensible, as mentioned. See, the first game, I understand the motivations of all the major characters. This time though, what? My last complaint is a broad one. Missed potential. Again, this is the sequel we waited 12 years for. I know they didn't spend 12 years making the game, it probably, was in development for 3 or 4 years, at a guess, but it's a little disappointing. We wanted more vocations and we have less. Yes, they are really distinct and improved now, but in terms of actual new vocations, we only really have Spearhand, which replaces Mystic Knight entirely, but isn't also a replacement for it because it's very different. Warfarer, which is technically new, but also just a combo of other vocations. And Trickster, which is cool, but really niche. I wasn't expecting like 20 new vocations, but the fact they've kept the same colour coding of the vocations from the first game makes no sense, because now we have no advanced yellow, no advanced green. There's a bunch of hybrids missing. Why is Trickster purple and pink when there's no base vocations? Why not just make it purple? Why not just make every vocation its own colour? Why does Mystic Spearhand need to be red-blue when there aren't, like red-green or whatever? And then there's the monsters. Whilst there's roughly the same as the first game, not including, Dark Arisen, we wanted new monsters. We get a few. I think there's like 6 entirely new monsters, and yes, I know there's a lot more sort of variety in the subspecies, like the Saurians are now actually kind of different instead of just being different colours. But all the new monsters are either very hard to find, easy to miss, or you only fight them really once. The Medusa is tucked away in a very out-of-the-way corner of the map, but it does respawn. The Sphinx is easily missable, can only be fought once per playthrough, and even the fight can be easily missed because the game sort of is hinting to use a specific item in that fight. Likewise, I didn't get to kill a Dullahan until almost 100 hours in, as the only other time I saw one before that, it vanished immediately with the sunrise. So whilst in some ways it delivered exactly what I wanted in terms of the world and the refinement of combat, I wanted more new monsters, a refined story, and a few new vocations. At the very least, don't use the colour scheme if it's now irrelevant. Like, don't stick to that when you don't need to. Either get rid of colour-coded vocations entirely, or make every vocation its own colour. There's only 10 vocations, and there are more than 10 colours. I don't understand why they did that. It feels like it's missing, you know? So whilst I understand that yes, it was probably took a long time to make all these systems and remake all these monsters, it does feel a lot just like a remake and not enough new things there. Now there's the rest. Things that aren't really bad, but are just mixed or confusing. Pawns, for example. Whilst in a lot of ways they've improved since the first game, there's been a few steps back too. Personality and inclination being tied together, the male voice options being a little lacking in my opinion. We have better control over pawns in some ways, but less control in others. I'm not going to miss inclinations drifting and overlapping one another, just from the way you play the game, but I also did like having slightly more control over their personalities and behaviour. There's more they could have done with them. Also, romancing your pawn is a terrible idea. Did we learn nothing from Ash and Aura? Whilst the world was fun to explore, I think it relies too much on cave systems for dungeons. I said from the first game, I want more dungeons, and we got loads this time, but 90% of them are caves. I wanted more, you know, castle ruins and things like that. And to further that, most of the rewards from these dungeons are kind of lackluster. It's not as bad as Final Fantasy XVI, where 99% of exploration rewards is like, oh, here's a high potion. It's like Elden Ring in that aspect. A lot of the dungeons, you don't really get anything worthwhile from them. And a lot of the equipment in the game, and almost all of the best equipment, is just bought from vendors, which surely that goes against RPG world laws. You're meant to get the coolest items in like a treasure chest in a dungeon. Or you fight a dragon, you explode the dragon and giant golden swords fly out from him. Finally, the end game for Dragon's Dogma 2 doesn't really exist. The first game had the Everfall and the raid fight with the Ur-Dragon. This time we have, well, not nothing. There is technically a sort of end game, but it's very limited, quite literally. Whilst there's some cool variants of monsters, they don't show up in New Game Plus. Unless, you know, you get to the end again. Like, those monsters should just be in New Game Plus at that point. In fact, New Game Plus just seems to be literally new game, but now you're high level and keep your items. All we really needed was the Everfall again, or even just the Ur-Dragon. Because you reach the end game, and then you can just buy all the best stuff from the vendors. There are a few good items hidden in chests here and there in the kind of new areas you can go to, but it's just not worth it. You know what I wanted? Multiplayer endgame. I know Dragon's Dogma and the pawn system is quite a single player experience, but imagine if we had a repeatable, farmable endgame dungeon that could be run with another player and their pawn. Wouldn't that be so fun? You know, it takes 20 to 40 minutes to randomise room placements and enemy placements so you can, oh, this time we're fighting a Sphinx, this time we're fighting a Medusa, whatever. Join with another Risen, fight your way through, fight a strong enemy at the end, get a bunch of wake stones, fairy stones, other rare materials, maybe some unique weapons. I don't know, I think that would have been a perfect endgame, which you could also do solo if you wanted to. And then keep that in New Game Plus, same way in Dragon's Dogma, when you went into New Game Plus, you could just sort of instantly teleport to the Ur-Dragon without needing to go to the end of the game again. And another point, the soundtrack of Dragon's Dogma 2 is a bit of a letdown compared to the first, which was amazing. The first game has a lot of memorable music, a lot of memorable dialogue. I don't really remember any music from the second game. I don't remember any of the dialogue in the second game. But in summary, Dragon's Dogma 2 is a really good game, carried by its combat. Just like the first game, there's so many buts, so much missed potential. In terms of fantasy world simulator with great combat, yeah, it delivers. It's the best there, I would say. The good news is that I strongly believe many of the game's faults could be improved with patches. But how often have we seen Capcom give the sort of treatment to a game that, say, I don't know, Cyberpunk got on release and post-release? Yes, they could improve performance, expand the story, add in new monsters, put in a proper endgame, but will they? Sadly, I think the chances are extremely small. I think they'll put in a few patches to tweak things here and there. Maybe they'll even remove the DRM at some point. But additional content outside of a DLC that we buy, like a paid expansion, I don't think we're going to get lucky there. Which sucks. Much like the first game, Dragon's Dogma 2 is overly ambitious. The advanced systems must have strained time or budget and left us with a product that, sadly, never hits its full stride. Compare with Elden Ring. That game isn't overly ambitious in comparison. There aren't all that many new systems going from Dark Souls, so the developers could presumably spend almost all of their focus and time creating content, levels, bosses, weapons. Because in a way, Elden Ring is a very simple game. Nioh 2 is another great example. Nioh 2 is just like Nioh 1, because everything is there from Nioh 1. They didn't really have to make all these new systems. The groundwork is all done, so they could just focus on content and refinements. Dragon's Dogma 2, they probably had to recreate, everything. They had to spend time getting the pawn system working, getting all the physics working, getting all the simulations working, getting everything in the world working, which doesn't leave them enough, time or budget for content. Maybe. Which is why we don't have 5 new vocations, which is why we don't have 10 new monsters, At the end of the day, the game is really good, and I've spent 100 hours playing it, and I want to keep playing it, but it's also disappointing because it could have been so much more. We have a strong need for an update, because it isn't too late, it can still reach its potential. We need 3, 5 more vocations, more monsters, being able to fight the monsters that are there, more often, a proper endgame, maybe even some multiplayer. Until next time though, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.